Clapperboard Beneath the Lanna Sky, Season 2, Episode 1, Roots and Wings. It had been 3 years since the resort was reborn. In that time, the landscape hadn't changed much. The rice fields still whispered in gold, the tamarind tree still cast long shadows across the garden, and the peacock still cried before the rain. But inside the walls of the family's home, everything had shifted. The daughters now led. Tara had taken charge of the cultural programming, curating experiences for guests that honored Lanna heritage without reducing it to decoration. She conducted dawn blessings, hosted story circles, and built a small library in the pavilion stocked with bilingual books on Northern Thai life. Lek was the mind behind the brand, coordinating photographers, guest artists, and collaborations with eco-conscious wedding services. The resort's digital presence had grown under her touch. They were now known far beyond Thailand, but success, again, brought movement. Not collapse this time, but momentum. And with momentum came the pull of distance. Tara had received an invitation, a prestigious cultural fellowship in Kyoto. 6 months of research and collaboration with regional artisans. It was everything she had once dreamed of. Back when she used to journal beside the peacock pen, she didn't tell anyone at first. Not even Lek. She tucked the acceptance letter beneath her pillow and let it weigh silently on her chest each night. Meanwhile, Lek had been approached by a global fashion brand looking for someone to lead their Sustainable Asia campaign. A Bangkok-based role. Full salary. International travel. She read the email 3 times. Then closed her laptop without replying. Neither sister knew the other was standing at a crossroads. Mayuree watched them both from a quiet place. She no longer worked as much. Her hands, once constantly folding, braiding, arranging, now moved slowly. She tended to the herb garden. She cooked when she wanted to. She smiled at guests, but no longer led ceremonies. Her body had begun to feel its years, even if her mind remained sharp. Marco, too, had changed. His hair had thinned. His shoulders stooped. But it was his eyes that told the truth, tired, distant, often searching for something unseen. He still repaired things around the resort, still walked the garden each morning. But lately, his pace had slowed. More than once, Mayuree had found him sitting on the wooden bench beneath the tamarind tree, not reading, not resting, just staring into space. One evening, she caught him pressing his fingers to the left side of his chest and wincing, just for a moment, before adjusting his shirt and walking away. He didn't speak of it. She didn't ask. But the silence had changed color. The resort remained steady. Bookings were healthy. Guests left notes of gratitude and awe. But within the family, a quiet question had begun to form. What comes next? The parents, once the heart of the place, were now becoming its roots, deep, unseen, but no longer leading. The daughters, once branches, had grown thick and strong, and now faced the pull of other skies. One evening, Tara sat in the library, tracing her finger along the spine of a book about Kyoto dyeing traditions. She imagined herself walking through a Japanese workshop. She imagined the silence, the cold, the beauty. Across the property, Lek reviewed branding documents for the Bangkok campaign. She imagined glass offices, rapid flights, long hours, and a life not bound to rice fields and family history. But every time she imagined herself away, she also imagined who would stay behind. Mayuree sat in her kitchen, lighting a single candle. She thought of her daughters, how she had once held them against her chest, tiny and crying, unaware of the worlds they would one day carry. She thought of Marco, how they had once fought to build something real in a place that didn't always welcome his foreign face. How they had survived storms, loss, nearly losing each other. And she thought of the resort, no longer just a business, but a mirror of their lives. Always changing. Always in need of care. Always fragile. Outside, rain began to fall softly, just enough to perfume the soil. And beneath the Lanna sky, the family stood again at a threshold. Not of crisis this time, but of choice. Season 2, Episode 2, Unspoken Goodbyes. The rain had cleared, but the air remained heavy, not with moisture, but with memory, the kind that settles into walls, into clothing, into the soft places between words. It was the kind of weight that no one acknowledged, but everyone carried. Marco sat alone in the guest library, pretending to read. In front of him lay a book about sacred woodcarving techniques. He had read the first paragraph 3 times and still didn't remember what it said. His hand rested over his chest, not pressing, not rubbing, just hovering there. As if trying to hold something in place. A week earlier, he had visited the clinic in Chiang Mai. Alone. Quietly. No one knew. He had told Mayuree he was going to check on a supply order. But what he received instead was a diagnosis, the kind that doesn't demand immediate alarm, but carries the suggestion of time being shorter than expected. The doctor had explained everything with careful English, printed a stack of papers, and asked if Marco wanted anyone else to be informed. Marco smiled, nodded, and left the papers behind on the counter. He wasn't ready. Not to explain. Not to be pitted. Not to disrupt the fragile peace they had only recently rebuilt, so he returned to the resort. Fixed a leaky pipe in cottage 4, and said nothing. Mayuree, too, was holding a silence of her own. That morning, she had received a letter, handwritten, unfamiliar handwriting, foreign postage. She opened it carefully, unfolding the pages like a memory she hadn't expected to revisit. It was from a man she had known before Marco, not a lover, but something more difficult to define. A childhood friend turned confidant, the only person who had ever made her consider a life away from Lamphun before Marco arrived with his quiet eyes and tidy hands. The letter spoke of a reunion being held in Chiang Rai, classmates from their school, old teachers, a few who had scattered across the country and world. The writer invited her warmly, openly, with no pressure. Just an acknowledgement of the time that had passed. Mayuree read the letter 3 times, then tucked it beneath her sewing basket. She didn't want to leave, but she also didn't want to forget who she had been before she became mother, wife, co-owner, keeper of everything. There was a part of her that longed for something that had no name. Not freedom. Not escape. Just breath. Tara and Lek moved through their days with practiced normalcy. Tara had written her official acceptance reply to the Kyoto Fellowship, but kept it in drafts. She waited for the right moment to send it, a moment that never seemed to come. Every time she passed Marco reading, or Mayuree tending the herbs, the guilt rose like steam. Lek had spoken to the Bangkok agency through video call. She had smiled, asked clever questions, given all the right answers. They offered her the role, full-time, starting in 6 weeks. She told them she would think about it. Neither sister told the other. They ate dinner together. They helped guests. They walked the garden paths. But their eyes rarely met in stillness, because to speak the truth aloud, to say I might be leaving, was to invite grief into a space they had just healed. One afternoon, Marco sat beneath the tamarind tree, watching a newlywed couple take photos barefoot in the field. He watched them laugh, not performatively, but fully. The way he and Mayuree used to, when they first built the bamboo bridge together and accidentally dropped the entire railing into the river. They had laughed for hours, wet, muddy, breathless. He missed that laughter, not just hers, but his own. A gust of wind pulled at his shirt. He winced. The pain came sharper now, not enough to drop him, but enough to remind him. He closed his eyes and listened to the rustling of leaves. A language he had come to understand better than Thai, or English, or Swiss German. Time was speaking. And it wasn't asking permission. That night, Mayuree found Marco's old sketchbook in the storage cabinet, the one with diagrams of the first resort layout. Each corner carefully measured, every building assigned a North Point reference. She flipped through the pages, until she reached one sketch, not of a structure, but of the tamarind tree, and two small girls holding paper lanterns. The drawing was dated 15 years ago. Her fingers trembled. Not from sadness, but from remembering how easily things slip through time. Later, as both girls slept in their rooms, Mayuree and Marco stood in the garden together, side by side, facing the still water of the fish pond. They didn't speak. He didn't tell her about the pain, she didn't tell him about the letter, and neither spoke of the feeling they both shared, that something was quietly approaching. And none of them were ready. Season 2, Episode 3, The Visitor from Zurich. He arrived without warning, no reservation. No email. No announcement, just a quiet knock on the resort gate mid-morning, as Tara was arranging bamboo centerpieces and Lek was editing images by the koi pond. The man was tall, gray-haired, and sunburnt in the wrong places. He wore loafers that didn't belong in a garden and carried a leather travel bag older than most of the guests. Marco saw him from the pavilion and froze. It had been over 20 years, they didn't embrace. There was no smile. Only a nod, subtle, formal, and heavy with unspoken history. His name was Lucas. He was Marco's younger brother. Marco had left Switzerland with very little, but what he had left behind, he had never spoken of. Not to Mayuree. Not to his daughters. Not even to himself, not truly. Now, Lucas stood in the middle of the resort like a ghost in broad daylight. He had come, he said, because of a letter Marco's old friend had forwarded. The news of Marco's resort, his daughters, his life in Thailand, none of it had reached their family directly. They had simply assumed he had disappeared for good. Now, Lucas had come to see whether that disappearance had been exile, or choice. The air changed. Marco became quieter. Not in his usual composed way, but in a closed, unreachable way. He offered Lucas a guest room. Avoided meals. Dodged questions. Mayuree, sensing the shift, tried to remain courteous. But tension clung to every exchange. Tara, confused, watched her father withdraw. She had never heard him mention family, not beyond a few vague references. No photos. No stories. No history. Now, here was a man who looked like her father. Spoke the same German lilt. Knew a version of Marco she had never imagined. Lek, ever observant, distrusted him instantly. Lucas, however, was not unkind. He complimented the resort. Admired the view. Ate everything he was served with gratitude. But he asked questions, too many. About the finances. About the ownership. About the daughter's education. Tara listened quietly, then slipped away. That night, she searched online for her father's name, something she had never thought to do before. She found a listing. An old engineering journal. Then a court notice. A minor financial dispute from 24 years ago, then nothing, just silence, as if his entire life had been erased. Marco and Lucas walked the grounds together the next morning. They didn't speak for the first hour. Then, by the garden wall, Lucas handed Marco a photo, their mother. Older now. Frail. Still alive. Marco didn't take the photo. He looked away instead. Lucas told him she had asked about him every New Year's Eve. That she still left a place at the table for him. That he could write. recall anything, Marco nodded, but said nothing. The wound was deeper than distance. It was built from things unsaid, expectations unmet. Shame unspoken, abandonment that had never been forgiven. Later that day, Mayuree found Marco alone in the kitchen, slicing mangoes for no reason. She didn't ask about the photo, or the silence, or the tension, but she did wonder, for the first time, if she had ever truly known where Marco came from. She had always accepted his quietness as part of his nature. But now, she saw it differently. Not peace, but armor, and she couldn't help but wonder what else had been kept from her, and from their daughters. That evening, Lucas told Tara stories over tea, about Marco as a boy. How he used to paint trains. How he once got lost in the Alps and refused to be rescued until he found the path back on his own. Tara laughed. Then cried, because she realized how many years she had spent trying to understand a father who had left behind an entire self. Lucas stayed only 3 days. When he left behind a small parcel, old letters, some newspaper clippings, and a carved wooden train from Marco's childhood. Marco didn't open it, not that night, not the next, not yet, but he kept it on the shelf, just above the broken teacup Tara had once glued back together. Season 2, Episode 4, Mother of the Bride. The booking came through a corporate assistant. Formal. Fast. Expensive. The bride was Thai Chinese. Her family owned real estate developments across Southeast Asia. The groom, Taiwanese American, worked in tech. They wanted a Lanna-style wedding, curated, elegant, and most importantly, perfect. They booked the entire resort for 6 days. Brought a planner from Bangkok. A food stylist. 3 photographers. And a list of demands that turned smiles stiff. For Tara and Lek, it felt like a test. Tara was asked to approve all ceremonial elements, including ones that weren't culturally accurate. Lek was pressured to tweak the branding to be more luxury, less earthy. The bride's mother asked if they could tone down the village vibe. Every comment was a needle. Mayuree, however, accepted it all without flinching. She folded napkins the way she always had. She adjusted floral color palettes. She nodded with grace, even when being told how to make her own culture more palatable. But beneath her stillness, something shifted. The bride's mother became the sun around which the event orbited. She criticized the pavilion lighting. Rejected 3 of Lek's designs. Asked if Mayuree's country accent could be softened for the speeches. It wasn't personal, but it felt personal. Tara, watching her mother bow over and over again, felt something inside her twist. She had grown up admiring her mother's grace, her stillness, her ability to stand quietly and still be seen. Now, that quiet was being interpreted as compliance. And for the first time, Tara felt anger, not at the guests, but at the system that allowed her mother to be erased in plain sight. Lek responded differently. She rolled her eyes, updated the fonts, took notes with sarcasm. But that night, she threw away a design sketch she had worked on for hours. She told no one. Mayuree didn't speak of her discomfort. But it followed her, in the kitchen, in the garden. Even in her dreams, she had spent decades creating a space where people could feel honored. Now, she was hosting a wedding where everything had to be packaged, curated, cleaned, as if Lanna culture needed translation. She had never felt so invisible in a place she had built, and yet, she kept smiling. Kept preparing lemongrass tea. Kept braiding banana leaves for the altar, but every movement grew heavier. The wedding day arrived, everything was flawless. Golden parasols. Precision-timed blessings. A curated monk procession. Tara gave the speech in perfect English. Lek managed the photographer's drone from her iPad. The guests were impressed. The planner was thrilled. The bride's mother declared it surprisingly professional. And Mayuree stood back and watched her culture become a set piece. Later that evening, the bride approached her. Alone. Quiet, she thanked her. Said she hadn't expected to feel so moved. That the ceremony reminded her of her grandmother's house, before wealth and status covered everything in marble and silence. Mayuree smiled. This time it was real, but the moment passed quickly. The music began again. The guests returned to taking selfies. And the bride was whisked away. That night, Mayuree sat alone in the pavilion after everyone had gone to bed. She didn't cry. She didn't rage, she simply lit a single candle, placed it at the altar, and sat in front of it, palms together, eyes closed, not to pray, but to remember who she was before the foreign guests, before the resort, before the scripts, and in that memory, she found a quiet power again, not the kind that demands, but the kind that endures. Across the property, Tara lay awake. Her fingers rested on the draft of her Kyoto reply. Still unsent, Lek stared at her ceiling, phone screen dark, Bangkok contract still unsigned, and in another room, Marco stood by the window, touching his chest. Not with pain this time, but with the weight of knowing he couldn't keep what he built forever. Season 2, Episode 5, What We Inherit. Tara left quietly, no fanfare. No announcements. Just a suitcase, a passport, and a folded printout of her Kyoto itinerary. Mayuree stood in the garden that morning, watching the taxi disappear into the mist. She didn't wave. Just held her hands together and breathed deeply, the way one does when letting go of something precious but unfinished. Tara hadn't said how long she would stay. It was meant to be 3 weeks, a cultural exchange hosted by a university in Switzerland, near Zurich. A temporary residency. But Mayuree knew better. Sometimes it's not the place that pulls. It's the questions we carry there. Switzerland was colder than Tara expected, not the temperature, the space. Everything was precise, ordered, efficient. People moved like they had somewhere important to be. And no one looked at her twice. Not because she didn't belong, but because she blended in. For the first time in her life, no one stared at her hair or her skin. No one asked what half meant. No one questioned her Thai name spoken with a Swiss accent, but the invisibility wasn't freedom. It was disorientation. She visited a library where her father once studied. Found his name in an old registry. Saw photos of young men who looked like him, but not him. Men who never left. Men who didn't disappear. She walked the streets of Zurich and imagined Marco at her age, alone, confused, perhaps ashamed. And for the first time, she didn't just see him as her father. She saw him as someone who had also been lost. Back in Thailand, Lek remained behind. The Bangkok job remained in her inbox. But she hadn't touched it in days. Instead, she wandered the resort after hours, barefoot, headphones in, camera dangling at her side. She captured photos of the place in silence, the rusting gate hinge, the reflection of lanterns on water, the cracks in the bamboo fence. She wasn't trying to show its beauty. She was trying to find its soul, and in doing so, she began asking herself something she had always avoided. Was this place still part of her story, or just her past? She had always believed she would leave, be bigger, louder, freer than the legacy left behind, but now, she wondered if that belief had simply been a defense against the pressure, the expectations, the weight of being a daughter in a house of dreams. Mayuree found the journal one morning. She was cleaning out the linen. cabinet when a soft notebook fell from the top shelf. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was hers, from long ago, pages filled with sketches of wedding dresses, floral designs, hand-drawn business cards. She had forgotten how big she used to dream. Not just of marriage. Not of love. But of building something hers. Reading those pages now, with her daughters nearly grown, with her husband growing more tired, she felt the ache of memory return. Not as sadness. As permission to imagine again, and Marco began to write, at first, just notes, fragments of days, names, sketches of people long gone. Then pages, reflections, stories. He didn't call it a journal. He called it a map, of how he got here. And why he stayed. He wrote about the Alps. The arguments. The shame of being different in a land obsessed with being correct. He wrote about Lamphun. About Mayuree's silence and strength. About his daughters. About the peacocks. The failures. The rain. No one knew he was writing. He did it each night, beneath a low lamp, with his reading glasses slipping down his nose. It wasn't for publishing. It wasn't for anyone, really, it was just the truth. His truth. Finally, in Zurich, Tara sat by a lake, wind pulling gently at her scarf. She pulled a small notebook from her bag, the one her mother had given her before she left. Inside, a note, written in Thai: some roots don't grow down. Some grow outward, until they find light. Go where you need to go. And come home when you're ready, she smiled. For the first time in weeks, she felt no conflict. She wasn't half of anything. She was whole, because of both worlds, not despite them, and in Lamphun, Lek stitched a photo series together. She named it What Remains, a visual story of the resort, its cracks, its shadows, its heartbeat, and she didn't post it online. She printed it. Hung it in the pavilion. Let guests walk through her eyes, some wept, some smiled, all paused. What we inherit is not always land. Or names. Or debt. Sometimes, it's the ache of unfinished dreams. Sometimes, it's the pressure to keep building what someone else began. And sometimes, it's the quiet knowing that you are already enough, whether you stay or go. Season 2, Episode 6, Storm Season. It began with a whisper in the wind, a shift in the air. Trees leaned ever so slightly, as if listening. Birds disappeared. The peacocks grew restless. And in the sky, darkness formed not as a shadow, but as a wall. The meteorologist on local radio called it a seasonal disturbance. But everyone at the resort knew better. This was not ordinary rain. Mayuree checked the drainage channels 3 times. Lek sealed the windows. Marco moved the electric wires off the bamboo floorboards. The staff tied down tents and cleared the lotus pond of floating lanterns. Tara was still in Switzerland. Her return ticket hadn't yet been changed. Mayuree didn't call her, not yet. That night, the storm hit. Rain fell like nails, sideways, relentless, punishing. Wind tore through the banana trees. The old pavilion roof cracked. The wooden bridge Marco had built 15 years ago splintered with a thunderous snap. Lek screamed as part of the guest deck collapsed into the swollen stream. No guests were harmed. Everyone had been moved to the concrete cottages hours earlier, but the resort, the dream, was breaking. In the chaos, Marco collapsed, not from injury. From the weight of it all. Mayuree found him crouched under the broken deck stairs. Arms trembling, breath shallow, she didn't speak. Just sat beside him as the rain soaked them both. He didn't ask for help. But she reached for him anyway, wrapping his shaking fingers in hers. They stayed that way for a long time. Together, quiet, soaked in the truth they could no longer ignore. At dawn, the storm passed. The sky peeled open like wet silk. Everything was still, as if holding its breath. Damage assessment began. 2 huts unusable. Half the garden flattened. The peacock pen destroyed. Marco, silent but pale, returned to the main house. Lek, though exhausted, began taking photos. Not for beauty. For record. For insurance. But when she reviewed them, she saw something else, what resilience looked like in real time. Tara arrived 2 days later. She didn't call ahead. Didn't wait for someone to pick her up. She stepped out of a taxi with mud already on her shoes and her eyes wide with disbelief. The place looked broken. But not dead. She found Mayuree replanting lemongrass, Lek moving bamboo planks, and Marco sitting under the tree where they used to hang paper lanterns. She walked to him. He looked up, surprised. She didn't say anything. She just placed her suitcase down, rolled up her sleeves, and picked up a broom. That night, the family gathered on the still intact back porch. Mayuree lit a candle. No speeches. No tears. Just firelight and presence. Marco spoke first, not with his voice, but with a notebook. He placed it on the table. Inside, pages of his handwriting. He looked at them and said, "If something happens to me, I want you to know how I got here." Then he smiled, small, tired, but real. Lek opened it, skimmed a page. Tara leaned over, eyes wide. It was a story they had never been told, not just about him, but about themselves. Mayuree looked around at her family. The storm had broken more than wood and tile. It had broken silence. Not all wounds were healed. Not all decisions made, but the rain had done what sun could not. It had forced them all to stop pretending there would always be time. Season 2, Episode 7, Letting Go. Marco began giving things away, not in dramatic gestures. Not in boxes with goodbyes. But little by little, as if setting birds free from invisible cages, he handed a Swiss pocketknife to a young gardener and said, "You'll use it more than I do." Gave a wooden carving set to Lek. A photography book to Tara. A woven cloth from Chiang Mai to Mayuree. He didn't say why, but they all knew. Mayuree found herself watching him more closely now, the way he sat down slowly. The way his hands trembled slightly when pouring tea. The deepening lines around his eyes. His voice, gentler, more deliberate. They had stopped talking about the illness. It wasn't denial. It was choice. He didn't want to spend his final energy being sick. He wanted to be here, fully, quietly, meaningfully, so Mayuree honored that. But every time he fell asleep on the bench outside the main house, she checked if his chest was rising. Tara struggled. She had returned from Switzerland determined to stay. To help. To rebuild. But now, with each sunrise, she felt her purpose unravel. Her father was dying, the resort was damaged, her future in culture and academia felt distant. She wanted to be useful, but couldn't save the thing that mattered most. She began writing. Essays. Letters. Fragments. Trying to put into words what grief wouldn't allow her to say aloud. Lek, meanwhile, worked harder than ever. She repaired wood, painted walls, reorganized staff schedules, cleaned the broken deck herself. She didn't cry. She didn't rest. She kept going, but one evening, when she found Marco's old wedding day shirt tucked into a forgotten cabinet, she sat down in the garden shed and wept until her knees gave out. One morning, Marco asked for a ritual, not a funeral. Not a goodbye, he called it a release. He said he wanted to float something down the river. A symbol. A gesture, Mayuree understood instantly. She didn't need words. That evening, as the golden hour touched the treetops, the family gathered by the water. Lek carried a small krathong made from banana leaves and wildflowers. Tara brought a candle. Mayuree brought incense. Marco brought a folded paper note he didn't let anyone read. They stood in silence. The candle was lit. The raft placed gently on the water. Marco set the note inside and pushed it downstream. No one spoke. They just watched the little flame float away, smaller and smaller, until it disappeared behind the bend. That night, they ate dinner together. No guests. No staff. Just the four of them. They laughed. Told old stories. Recalled ridiculous mistakes made in the early years of the resort. Marco smiled more that night than he had in months, and when Tara stood to clear the plates, he touched her hand and said, "Thank you for staying." She didn't answer. Just squeezed his hand back. Later, Mayuree and Marco sat under the tamarind tree. Their hands intertwined. She whispered, "When it's time, I'll carry it all. The story. The land. The memory." He nodded, and for once, didn't hide the tears in his eyes. Season 2, Episode 8, Beneath the Lanna Sky. Marco passed away at dawn, not with drama. Not with pain. But with breath that slowed, softened, and finally vanished as the birds began to sing. Mayuree was holding his hand. The sky outside their window glowed a soft, pale pink, the color of promise and goodbye. She didn't cry right away. She simply closed his eyes, kissed his forehead, and whispered something no one else heard. Then she sat beside him until the sun rose fully. Because he had always loved the sunrise, the news did not spread with noise. No wailing. No loud mourning, only the subtle rituals of Lanna grieving, white cloths tied to trees. Incense rising like memory. Water poured beside his favorite peacock tree. No grand funeral, just a gathering in the garden he helped build, with the people he had touched. Staff. Guests. Friends from the village. A few foreigners who had once married here and returned to pay respects. Tara and Lek stood beside their mother, dressed in shades of white and cream. Tara read a short passage from Marco's journal, about how he had first arrived in Thailand with no map and no plan. Only a hunger for stillness and a hope that love would be enough. Lek played a song on her phone, one Marco used to hum while pruning the orchids. Neither of them broke down, but that night, each cried alone in a different corner of the house they grew up in. Mayuree remained composed. For 3 days, she organized, greeted, folded linens, welcomed monks, offered food, and bowed gently to each condolence. But on the 4th night, long after everyone had gone, she walked barefoot to the riverbank. There, she knelt. Not to pray. Not to speak, but to grieve, fully, finally, and without restraint. The river made no judgment. The sky did not interrupt. The moon lit only her outline as she wept into her own hands. The following week, Tara was offered a position with the university in Chiang Mai, a chance to research cultural identity and heritage preservation. She hesitated. She wasn't ready to leave, but Mayuree, now seated where Marco once sat in the garden pavilion, gently placed her hand over Tara's. "Go," she said softly. "Tell our story in your way." Tara wept again, but this time it was with gratitude. Lek, meanwhile, redesigned the guest experience. No more elephant packages. No more luxury upgrades. Just authenticity, community dinners, Lanna music under lanterns, hand-tying ceremonies with elders from the nearby temple. She renamed the experience, Under the Tamarind Tree. And guests came, not in droves, but in purpose. Not for perfection, but for truth. One morning, as Lek was sweeping the old garden path, she saw something in the breeze, a peacock feather, floating slowly down. It landed near the spot Marco once called the heartbeat of the land. She picked it up and smiled. Still here, she whispered. Mayuree began to write, not publicly. Not for anyone else. But for herself, pages of memory, from the first moment she met Marco in the card shop, to their early fights, to the joy of building something from nothing. She wrote in Thai and in English. She wrote in the voice of someone who had loved deeply and lived fully, and she titled the collection simply, Beneath the Lanna Sky. The final scene unfolds years later. Tara, now a professor, returns with students from abroad, young, curious, hungry to understand Thai culture. Lek greets them at the gate. She's older, calmer, rooted. Mayuree, now mostly gray, still walks the garden each morning. Her steps slower. But her presence still steady as the mountains. As the students gather under the tamarind tree, Mayuree stands beside her daughters. Behind them, the resort, smaller than before, simpler, more alive, and above them, the Lanna sky, vast, blue, infinite.